This is a University of Otago podcast.
All right. It's interesting talks, the first couple of talks, and I guess there's a theme sort of emerging on at least those two, and I'm going to develop some further, which is that if you're starting to talk about big data, there's these two kind of sides to the story. One is the value kind of proposition, and the other one is the risks, obviously to privacy, but to human rights in general, and I think there's another kind of risk too. Because I'm introducing the use of big data in government and thinking about government performance and the use of big data to understand performance and improve performance of the state sector. I'm a consultant at the moment. I was working in child protection for many years, and in child protection identified a lot of problems with the way the state sector works and started trying to solve those. And then I met my rocket scientist, data scientist, and started to understand what could be done and started to think about ways in which we could solve some of the problems I came up with in child protection with big data. But you don't solve problems with big data without unpacking other problems. So what I'm going to do today is share with you both the value proposition of using big data to improve the performance of the state sector, but also some of the challenges and where I guess my head's heading in terms of some of the solutions to those challenges, in terms of how do we do this in a way which doesn't end up with Big Brother, not just big data. So just a little bit of introduction here, and then get to my slides. Look, my confidence in the government's use of big data is probably not 66% actually, it's probably about 30%. I've been in there for many years and I've seen their behaviour, and it's not because people are bad people. I think you do end up in an echo chamber where you're in the star chamber with ministers, and you've got this imperative to do something. You know, a kid just died and is on the front page of the thing. Christ, let's build a predictive model and corral all of the kids and the parents in the country, and you know, have the social worker waiting beside the table in the delivery room waiting for the baby to come out, you know, because we've predicted that they might be abused. That's actually been seriously contemplated, right? So, whilst I think there's huge value to both, and let's take a step back. When I talk about big data, I'm really talking about data science in its broadest kind of sense. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, which all lines up, and I'll talk about it in a second. And when I talk about performance, I'm talking about that in its broader sense as well. So I'm not just talking about KPIs, I'm talking about, I mean, when you think about performance, it kind of has an orientating function, doesn't it? You know, well, let's go in this direction. It has a feedback and learning kind of function. What's the other function I had? It also has, how do you improve performance and actually innovate to actually drive new kinds of performance? And I think big data has something to say about all of those. Okay. Almost every sector's been disrupted by big data, right? You've all heard of Napster and now Mega Upload and various other ways of disrupting the music industry. Latest is iTunes and that kind of stuff, and streaming. Bitcoin is set to disrupt the financial sector. GitHub is changing the way we manage large IT projects without managers, without KPIs, essentially, or not in the traditional sense of the word. Amazon's disrupting the retail sector. Uber, I just joined Uber last week and signed the big long armload of, you know, I've sold my soul to Uber and they'll collect my child if I do something wrong. And told them my phone number. You have to tell them everything, right? And then promptly didn't use it very well. But the point was, they're disrupting the taxi industry. There's a whole lot of disruption going on. Where's the one place where there isn't a lot of disruption going on? What's the biggest monopoly in New Zealand? The state sector, yeah. Unelected, right? It's an old boys club. They all, you know, tap each other on the shoulder. Oh, you're CE material because you manage risk well, and you don't innovate too fast for us, and you know we'll shove you over into this agency for a little while, and you'll raise up the ranks there, and try on a frontline agency for a while, and then you move into SSC and you become one of the uber bureaucrats and end up at the top where we're all very nice to each other and don't rock the boat. Yeah, unless the state sector disrupts itself, it's not going to be disrupted. I mean, they make the law. Well, they don't make the laws. They think they make the laws. I think the government makes the laws, but don't they? But could the state sector be disrupted by big data? I think it is going to be, and we've got a kind of a choice. We're right at the point where we've got a big choice about how we might do that. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you some ways in which I've been pushing the use of big data, and some of the things that make me wake up with a cold sweat at night, worrying about where this is all going to go. Okay. Meet Marky Smith. How many of you have seen Marky Smith? He's kind of got a life of his own now. I've seen other CEs using him, and everybody's using him now. This is my main performance indicator for the state sector. This is what I discovered in child, youth and family. This data here is, when I arrived in child, youth and family, all the data was in little silos, right? It's a bit like ANZ was saying, you know, it's all spread all over the place. And this is youth justice data. So those two squares at the top, oh, I've got a laser, haven't I? Here we go. Yeah, those are referrals from the police, right? This kid got a couple of family group conferences because he'd been nicking some Shrewsbury's or something, and he spent some time in a youth justice residence. And that's the only data, well, sorry, there's a bit of other data, but it's mostly processing data that the youth justice teams in child, youth and family use to manage youth justice. So most of the KPIs in that are around the, you know, made sure he got locked up properly, did we do the FGC on time, and did the parents turn up? A lot of processing indicators. The question is, what the government does is target services, right? We've got to make decisions every single day, whether we're using predictive model or not. We've got to make decisions about what kind of service we're going to give this kid. Doesn't look too bad. He didn't start too early. He's 15 years old, you know. He's only done 2 crimes that we found. What sort of service should we give this person? Any hands up? Yeah. The common garden variety youth justice service, or the super, you know, Big Mac with fries and everything on it? Or should we just kind of try not to actually engage them in the youth justice sector because that might be better? Well, it turns out when you join the data up, if I could join the data up, as we did join the data up, turns out this kid was first known to child, youth and family. These are people in the same building who sit next to each other, who are dealing with the same clients, who don't know they're dealing with the same clients. You know, that's a notification, right? And that's a behavioural difficulty finding. So at 3 years old, this kid had behavioural difficulties. Then notified again at 4 with sexual abuse finding, notified again at 5 with physical abuse finding, notified again, behavioural difficulties again, go figure, right? Physical and sexual abuse again at 8, big gap here. I think child, youth and family was probably busy with somewhere else. Another notification with more sexual abuse at the age of 11. First service, get taken into care, gets a family whānau agreement actually. The family whānau agreement's our lesser of the family whānau agreement and the family group conference. So he finally got to service there, and then of course we see the rest of what's happening. We also go further. He spends quite a bit of time, these purple things here are time spent in care of the state, right? It's been taken off his parents and it's in care of somebody else. But that's only child, youth and family data. Now, you know, in child, youth and family, we couldn't ask the simple question, does a notification from a teacher usually end up with findings of sexual abuse or physical abuse? Because we hadn't joined up our data, because we're busy managing processes. So to me, big data is the data we already have and using it in a more joined up kind of way to see what's really going on. What is going on? We've got his education data. This is real data. This has actually been used. Didn't do too badly. You got one subject at NCA level 2. That's not too shabby. I mean, you might think one subject at NCA level 2 is not great, but actually given this background, it's not too shabby. And then actually I went on to some tertiary training. I've forgotten what it was. We've anonymised it all, so I can't go back and find them. We joined up the youth services data. Someone clearly thought this guy was in trouble at some point and gave him a youth services thing, high needs intervention, transition to adulthood. That's probably what got him in a tertiary education, I suspect. Didn't complete the tertiary education. had an independent youth benefit. We've got the unemployment benefit data now from work and income, independent youth benefit, and then on to the unemployment benefit. Now, if you go back to where I was before, looking at his youth justice service that he received in youth justice, here, those are approximation of needs, and that's an approximation of some outcomes, okay? But nobody's actually accountable for that kid. Nobody's accountable for the kid or his outcomes. We're all accountable. This person here probably met their KPIs for doing a notification on time. We've got this thing called the unallocated queue, right? We manage risk by managing unallocated queues. We don't manage risk by managing kinds of people with kinds of risk, okay? And their outcome, unemployment benefit. Actually, that's not too bad, actually, only, you know, half a year on unemployment benefit for someone with that kind of background. This kid's got some resilience, you know. Then we joined the corrections data and found that he was in prison, so that's why he wasn't receiving an unemployment benefit. Yeah, I know, you laugh or cry, right? This is my performance indicator for the state sector, the social sector, right? We spend billions of dollars locking people up, and we spend minute amounts when they most need it. And it's because the whole state sector, this is a bit what Tina was saying about ANZ. You've got your retail banking and your mortgage guys and your insurance guys and that sort of thing, and the insurance guys are doing stuff over here and they're meeting their KPIs, and the retail bankers are over here meeting their KPIs, but none of them are thinking about the customer and going, how have we got Bob Jones and we're making him go to a bank teller? Oh shit, we should be ringing him up and selling insurance, you know. So it's the same problem, and the state sector needs to be customer centered, and especially in the social sector, right? You find these lovely diagrams of people with kids and families at the centre, and there's all these services around them. And once someone said, probably imagine being in there and looking at all these services around you, you know. It's not coordinated, not collaborative, it's focused on outputs, not outcomes. And what using our data better can do for us, without going and trolling through Facebook and all the other big data that most people think about, government's had this data for years. This is going back to 1980s. Using it better means that we can start to make the bureaucrats accountable for actual outcomes. That's on the plus side. It also shows us the problem. We did some other work on this. Brendan Bohr talks about this, my old boss in MSD. I asked him, well, what can we do with all this capability, Brendan? He said, find me the top 10,000 people in New Zealand. We did. Top 10,000 people cost, I think it's $10.7 billion. About half of them are like Marky Smith here. They've all been known to SIFs at the age of 2 or 3 or something. But we didn't do anything for them. Okay. So the team we set up in the Ministry of Social Development to do all this kind of work, we've got 30 million case notes as well. Now, we use about 5% of our data in child, youth, family and MSD because we're mostly focused on processes, right? Is the queue got big? Ooh, how many notifications have we got? And we don't really understand, I mean, the front line understands, don't get me wrong, what's going on, but the management team and the executive don't understand what's going on. So we started text mining our case notes. We could find out how much, there was one case where there was 2 kids abusing, they had a list of girls in their neighbourhood and they were going down through them, abusing them all. And that went on TV, and Ray Smith, our boss at the time, we ended up on TV going, oh my God, I'm sorry, we didn't have a program for those guys. And he was going to come back and say, find me all the kids with harmful sexual behaviour. So we used the text mining and we found all the kids with harmful sexual behaviour. But it turns out there were 7 times more than they thought there were that were actually recorded in the proper fields. So we're starting to use some of the 30 million case notes we've got over 20 or 30 years to understand what's really going on and how these patterns relate to each other. And of course you can use that also to do some modelling. And this is, I just use this example here. This is data from, there's a program called the Youth Pipeline. We had, because of the global financial crisis, all the kids were leaving school, not getting jobs, and some were at very high risk. And if they didn't get jobs, we know that they're going to stay on a benefit for a long time, have a really shitty outcome. If you make that bad transition, it's really bad for you, right? So we're using the education and work and income data to build a predictive model to figure out which kids do we need to try and get to first. You can see all these variables. Now, point of issue here, the state sector does predictive modelling every single day and has been for thousands of years. We target services, we stigmatise people, we put them in groups and we call them policies, you know, and we have these funny little decision rules like solo mum. right? I call that a two-rule decision, right? There are a lot of solo mums who are doing quite well. But, you know, policy analysts, even their little heads like this, have two-rule decisions. Second thing is, when you are making these decisions, of course there's biases, right? Maori are overrepresented in child, youth and family, and in police, and almost every other statistic. And some of it we've found is institutional racism and stuff like that. What these kind of models do is allow you to actually see that and observe it and try to do something about it. So I actually think they're better than the current way of building our models, which is in our wetware here, and applying those on the front line. But so I think they can do a couple of good things around that too. They actually measure the level of systematic bias in it and watch it and account for it. Anyway, so point of this, sharing data. So this same model applied to different data sets. This one has some SIFS data. We added a couple of SIFS variables, was known to CYF. I was just using this with the executive to show them why they needed to add their data together. That's the first model. I don't know if you know, that's the level of lift. The red dots are kids who've left university and not got a job and are languishing on a benefit. And the green dots are the ones who've left university and not languishing on a benefit. That's the extra lift you get when you say if you had a child, youth and family history. All right? That represents probably several $100,000 of non-wasted resources in targeting services at people who don't need them. Most services targeted by the state sector are targeted at people who don't need them, mostly false positives. Sometimes false positives in the private sector, they just gum up your email box and your letterbox. But in the public sector, sometimes they can mean that I'm accusing you of abusing your daughter. I'm going to come and investigate you with the full powers of the state, which can lead to suicide and family marital breakups and all sorts of things, even though it's a false positive. So we have a different kind of problem in the state sector. And false negative means that we didn't escalate a case and the kid dies, you know. So false positives and false negatives in the marketing and the private sector don't generally add up to much. A missed opportunity to make some money, or or annoying your customers too much with offers they don't want, not passing the relevancy test. Whereas in the state sector, if you think about what the state sector is, it's fundamentally coercive in the sense that why do we give these people power to do stuff? It's because we're solving this tragedy of the commons and we want people to coordinate our decision making for us about where to target services, what counts as murder, which road to build, which kid to investigate. You know, that's what we do. That's just what the state sector does. So making better decisions is an advantage, direct advantage to performance. A lot of evaluations are focused on trying to solve the problem of what service works. What I'm trying to solve here is making sure we can get the right service to the right person at the right time, preferably when Marky Smith is 3, not when he's 30. Okay. So we're using this to do some predictive modelling. I'm not an advocate of using the predictive models on the front line. I don't think you need to. If you talk to the social workers in the contact centre in Auckland, they know which families and which people are most in need, generally speaking. What I want to do with it is make the state sector more accountable for those outcomes of Marky Smiths. So at the moment, policy's done on who's got the most cost coming in and how much do I need to pay. So all the money goes to dialysis machines and corrections facilities, not to general practice and incredible years programs. You know, cost $90,000 a year to lock up a criminal. The best gold standard in reducing recidivism is like 10%. And costs an armload of money, whereas for a 3-year-old, incredible years works pretty well for 50% of them, and it's about $5,000. So what we need to do is bring policy back to see the whole journey of the person and make the bureaucrats accountable for the whole journey. So I'm using predictive modelling to do this. We first did this in work and income. You might have heard about it, called the investment approach. It's a partially flawed version of what should be done, but it's made a lot of progress. Traditionally, in work and income, what they did was their KPIs were all about how many unemployed people I got back to work. Now, if Dave here lost his job tomorrow and I got him back to work, you get a big tick, right? Marky Smith lost his job tomorrow, you get a big tick, right? But those two things aren't the same, they're not equal, right? Dave loses his job, he's probably, if I give him a CV writing course and tell him to put a tie on and, you know, lose some weight and, you know, that's probably an investment that's not actually going to have a big return on your investment, is it? It's probably a waste of state sector resources. Anyway, it turns out, we haven't got a whiteboard, have we? Turns out that work and income's $1 billion operating budget, for the whole of MSD, I think, has got, they spent 95% of their time on unemployment beneficiaries. And when you work out so this thing here, when you work out the forward liability of all the current clients on the benefit system, we pay out $19 billion a year. The total forward benefit liability, the amount we think we're going to pay is about $76 billion, right? It turns out that the unemployment beneficiaries, the high volume of people like yourselves who are going to lose your jobs at some point, turned out to be about 5% of that $78 billion. Whereas sickness beneficiaries, invalids beneficiaries, lots of other people with higher needs who sometimes got to be invalids benefits because the person on the front line didn't know what to do with them. They were going to ruin my KPIs. You should go on invalids benefit. Are risk shifting those people's lives and the forward liability of the government into the future and meeting their KPIs, which is exactly what happened to Marquis Smith. So what we're doing now is we've made them accountable for reducing the forward benefit liability of a person, which means Dave doesn't get the big tick anymore. Yeah, it's great, we helped him, but did we spend too much? It's a bit like the banks, actually. Banks use, you and I, who don't earn much, get FPOS, right, and we get internet banking, whereas Bob Jones probably gets a personal banker who's situated somewhere ringing him up. He's a high-value customer, right? Well, Marquis Smith should be a high-value customer, okay? We've got a problem solved for this guy. We've got to think of the coordination of the services and stuff. Whereas for Dave, we'll just give him the vanilla service on the internet and he can just go on that and stuff off and not take up all our money. So the point about all this is what we can do is pull the data together and get a shared data to understand future risk in the social sector to be able to provide a more customer-centered decision. So your KPI, if we think about performance, your KPIs previously were one size fits all. Now they're based on your risk profile. Now, of course, there's errors in that. There's false positive, false negative. Maybe Dave loses his job, and because he said something shitty in the media, that no one wants to give him a job. And Marquis Smith, I don't know, perhaps he's just a genius at maths or something for some reason. Maybe we get it wrong, and we do get it wrong. In fact, we know how often we get it wrong. This is one of the points. But the other point is, we're not getting it as wrong as we are now with the current KPIs, right? Which encourage risk shifting and silo shifting. How am I doing for time? Right. This is being used on the front line, and it's being used in education. If we go back a step, so that middle line there, if you pretend that middle line's green, that's saying, if this is predicting your education potential, you're going to get 42 in your maths exam or whatever. Then using this in education, doesn't always have to be about money, right? If you're using this in education, then your education potential is currently that. Can I lift it or do I erode it? That's what's happening in the States at the moment. Now, it's being used two different ways in the United States. If you go to Texas, there's marching on the streets by the teachers because they're pissed because people are using this for performance-based pay. And so this teacher in this classroom is really good with high-achieving students. The girls at the front of the class, this is the predicted outcome. So they were predicted to get 80%, and she got them to 90%. These guys were predicted to get 50%, and he got them to 52%. Actually, they dropped this year. But the naughty boys at the back of the class, she ignores those guys, and they actually do worse than they were predicted to do. So I call it a value add measure or an education potential measure. I think Maclean's College in New Zealand's using it. So they can understand their performance. What's happening, the good schools that do this are using it really well. The geography teacher's going back to the other teacher before him and saying, you've sent me some kids who should have been up here and they're down here. What are you doing? Here, let me help you. I know how to teach those guys. So they're using it to do practice. In Texas, they're using it for performance-based pay from the centre. So the state legislature, or whatever how that works over there, basically using it because they can encompass and understand inside the classroom. It breaks down the classroom walls. Then some senator can probably just pick which teachers are good or not. Gives you a lot of power. You can collapse all of the complexity down to start to understand that and start to take action. Comes back to your point, David and Tina, about trust and value and how you're going to use this sort of thing. Here's another teacher there's actually a phrase for this kind of curve that's quite common. The muddling middle, that's right. They ignore the muddling middle. I worked in the Ministry of Education for 6 months trying to talk to them about this. Yeah, they do well with the noisy boys because they're noisy, and they do well with the good girls because they're good. And the muddling middle just kind of muddles along and doesn't do as well as it could have done. So we can get quite detailed, specific performance indicators which are related to the kind of person and their potential. Now, some teachers use this badly, stigmatise them. Oh, you got no potential, you're fucked, you know. Whereas other teachers are going, gee, this is what the model's saying your potential is, but I want to see if we can break this model and we can actually be up here. And then shows them other kids who've done that, you know. Okay, so that's one kind of thing we're starting to introduce. The second kind of thing the big data can do is because of the low-cost platforms and data lakes and grid computing and all that other kind of stuff, and the fact that we're digitising most of our behaviours in organisations, you can actually build learning into the fabric of your business as usual. So I'm not going to dwell on this one actually, I'll just flip through this quickly. But the point is we're running campaigns to learn what works in real time. Normally in the state sector it's a big waterfall, right? Minister says do this, policy guys justify it, these guys down here then execute it, IT guys ask for more money, and then the evaluator comes in at the end and goes, fuck, you know, you should have done that, I can't measure a thing. So we're going to do a process thing and tell you that everyone likes it. Well, we can do better than that. We're starting to develop these closed-loop campaign-based targeting, based off the banks actually. I went to a lot of this off Loyalty New Zealand who do this. How many of you got a Flybuys card? Yeah, 70 different companies in New Zealand are joining their data up so they can profile you. We had a baby and I got rung by about 3 different insurance companies the moment I brought some nappies at the New World. But anyway. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that one, sorry. So the closed loop campaign-based targeting, this is the value proposition, right? So this is 2 services that Work and Income provide. Now they're doing this now because they have that KPI. Because they're accountable for forward liability, we've got an outcome like reducing the level of time on a benefit, not just getting someone back to work. We can measure the level to which they've achieved that. Did they just cherry pick some Daves? Well, they're not going to get a high return on investment, or did they manage to get a few Marky Smiths back to work, you know? So we can measure what the predicted level of back to work was and what we actually achieved, and then track it with a control group and do it in real time. And this is a real-time campaign. So work-focused case management, the red line, that's one-to-one service, costs about $500. Social worker time, you know, teach you how to do a CV and put your tie on. Work search seminars like this. Talk to everyone, put a tie on, and this is how you do your CV. And we compared them. Now, interestingly, work search service, only I think 38% of people go back to work after that. But it's got a higher return on investment because it doesn't cost so much. I can get bandwidth, right? I can get more people and I only need a few of them. Whereas the work-focused case management, the detailed one-to-one one, has got 42% of people back to work. But there's not as high return on investment because you're not getting through as many people and it costs too much. So we're breaking even return on investment compared with the control group, right? And the control group, 35% of them get back to work anyway. So the marginal difference is quite small. But because of the high forward liabilities, it's still a good thing to do. Now the closed loop learning means you go down this loop once and you do that once and you go, that's pretty good. Where the analytics and the big data come in, then we start to figure out, well, who did it work best for? And what we found was, if I've done the seminar and the people that sort of went back to work and some of them didn't, you know, wasn't because I just talked to these guys and not talked to those guys. We found out the characteristics of the people. So the next time we invited people in who that kind of service works for. And they were, there was like 30 variables, but I think, you know, ex-criminals, young people, non-immigrants, I think it's more effective for, and if you're the opposite of that, then we probably want to find something else because we know that this doesn't work for you. And then the next time we targeted the service, yeah, $4.20 return on investment, almost immediately. That's what using closed-loop campaign-based targeting, analytics, and data feedback does for you. And that's a constantly ongoing process. Interestingly enough, I've chatted with the guy who gave me this graph from MSD, since I've left MSD now, that decays. So they invite all the ex-criminal young non-immigrants in, and they keep trying with the ones who it doesn't work for. So they keep spending money on people it's not working for. So the return on investment's going down. So they're learning, right? But at least they are learning, and they got real-time feedback. And it's not this one-off waterfall that the minister sort of has to budget for later on. Okay. Now I get to the interesting part. So you can do all that kind of stuff, but it requires joining up deeply personal information and trusting the bureaucrats in charge of you for these kinds of services. I founded a thing called the New Zealand Data Alliance, which is a bunch of us data scientists who think there's both a lot of value, and we all wake up with a cold sweat at 2 in the morning because we worry about how it's going to be used. And one thing we did, we went up to ministers. So we're giving advice to ministers with no cost, and we're giving advice to, I've just chatted with the Salvation Army and a few other people, Water Safety New Zealand. We went up to ministers and we showed them this. Now, have you been to Cabinet? There's a big round room up the top of the beehive, right? Oh, you've probably been there though. Sort of, 4 or 5 ministers at one end and us data scientists sitting at the other end. I actually made the data scientists come into the room a bit early so that we could grab all the seats and piss off all the bureaucrats who ended up standing around the wall. Anyway, most of those bureaucrats are my old bosses and things. But what we wanted to show them was some of the data science around network analytics. So I don't know if you've read Alex Pentland, around social networks. He only ever writes about himself, not as researchers, so he's a real prick. But he writes some good stuff about what can be done. And we're learning a lot about the science of complexity. So whereas, in the past, Taylorism and Lean Six Sigma, all that kind of stuff was all about reductionism on management of processes and that. And Marky Smith is a direct result of that kind of compartmentalising. We're getting much better at understanding networks and what makes an effective network and what makes an ineffective network. And so what I did is I got the network of all the people in the room, and I got my LinkedIn profile. You can actually download your own network. It actually tells you who other people are related to. Astonishing invasion of privacy, I think. I took the names off, but there's Peter Hughes, and there's so. But what it showed me actually was one of the things Sandy Pentland says, that echo chambers don't innovate very well. You're talking to people who you like talking to all the time and who are easy to talk to, and they're all part of your club. You don't innovate very well, and it also leads to big disasters. You can randomly walk off a cliff as a group, right? Because you're not seeing something that's coming over the horizon. And what was interesting about my network is there were these 2 echo chambers. There's a big data echo chamber and the policy analyst echo chamber. And funny enough, and the data scientists who I'd recruited, we're all sitting in the middle here. And I guess one of the big worries I have about government and its ability to manage this really deeply technically complicated problem and ethical dilemmas and human rights issues is that they operate in a star chamber where they're mostly talking to themselves, and in that kind of environment I could see it easily turning into the Texans, using that big data to basically be more powerful. If you think about the kind of disruption that's going on, I remember I mentioned all those 8 sectors being disrupted. So Amazon and Uber and that. They're disintermediating, but they're doing it in a particular kind of way. What they're doing is they're disintermediating the existing rent takers. So Penguin and all the other publishing companies are being disintermediated because Amazon's got economies of scale now and can manage the complexity using big data to offer niche services to individual customers at scale, and so disintermediating all of those previous holders of the system, right? If you wanted to get your book published, you had to go through all those guys. Uber's doing the same thing. There were taxi monopolies in Wellington, and then we tried to disrupt those, and now Uber's become just a bigger monopoly, right? So it's disintermediation, but it's really it's the same kind of model. I think the picture's the right one. No, it's not. Can I come back to this one? And yeah, that's all right. There's another kind of disruption that's happening from big data, though, as well. And so I think this is touching on what you were saying, Dave, about the it can be good for human rights or really bad for human rights. Echo chambers and in network terms, this kind of network is susceptible to what they call single node failure. Requires this guy agreeing before you do anything. And you can influence this guy to go in lots of different directions, which the rest of the network has to comply with, because he's the one who holds all the information and all of the power to manage that network. And that's the current state sector, right? There's probably 12 individuals in there who basically figure out what policy is going to work and which ones aren't, you know. The other kind of disintermediation, you know, GitHub, thousands of coders across the world who don't have a manager and no KPIs can build complicated stuff that now is on the servers in IBM and Microsoft, and they're all using the open source stuff developed by these communities of open source people who have self-mobilized together as a peer-to-peer network. Bitcoin's a bit the same. The financial sector is controlled by, you know, Goldman Sachs and all those guys because you needed a safe pair of hands to manage the transactions, financial transactions internationally and that sort of thing. So they rent take as they click the ticket and allow you to do that because you needed a trusted intermediary. That trusted intermediary accrues a lot of other kinds of powers as well. What's happening with Bitcoin is because we can make transparent all of the transactions using the blockchain, we're developing a truly peer-to-peer network for how we can transfer money around that doesn't need some trusted intermediary in the middle, but the same as GitHub. So there's this other kind of approach to managing, mobilizing communities and cooperating, collaborating across communities. I guess what I'm saying is, and this, I'll go back to this slide. I wrote a paper for the Productivity Commission. They were asking me, well, how can big data be used to help the state sector? And I talked a lot about the predictive modeling and the closed loop learning and that sort of stuff. But the other thing I said is that we can hand back control, because if you think about it, if you think about what happens at the moment is the state sector is accountable for these inputs and outputs, and which allows Marky Smith to develop because no one's accountable for his outcome. Well, guess what? We can now be accountable for outcomes. So the system, the social system together, can have much higher visibility of when they're stuffing things up, okay, and when things are going well, and then learning what works. The counterintuitive thing about that is you need to then let go of the how of solving the problem of how to actually give Marky Smith a better life. At the moment, most of Wellington, most of the high rent in the CBD is taken up by policy analysts who are busy deciding how things should be done. We won't need them anymore if we can focus on outcomes and let local communities adapt. I'll give you one example. So in Canterbury DHB, they have a problem with their system. They've got silos, they've got siloed data and all that kind of thing. What their finance group did was said, right, and this is what happens. Treasury says, right, GPs, you're going to get this much. Nursing, you're going to get this much. You're going to get this much for needles. You're going to get this much. You know, so people at the centre are deciding. It's this hierarchy. What they did in Canterbury DHB is they disrupted the system. So they ignored Treasury and they collated their budget back together. So the appropriation, it's illegal, right? But they pulled their budget back together and said to the GPs and the surgeons, so they're having this problem with elective surgery, right? The elective surgery budget's going ballooning through the roof, and the Canterbury DHB's got a flat budget, so what are we going to do? And the surgeons are complaining because the GPs are forwarding too many of the false positives, and the GPs are complaining because the surgeons never access so I can get a proper diagnosis. Well, they locked them in a room and shoved pizzas under the door and told them, you got 12 million bucks, solve the frickin' problem, and they did. The people who are owners of the system and the users of the system came up with more nuanced decisions. In fact, it's not even the solution they had which is important. The fact that they all bought into the solution rather than it being imposed. So what normally happens is they normally go, GPs, shit, we need more money. So they go up here and they go, we need more money, and they compete. Whereas these guys actually collaborating around a shared objective and shared visibility of the system. So what Caroline Guller and the guys in Canterbury DHB did is they showed them the system, showed them how it was going. And they gave them shared visibility. It's a bit like GitHubbing it, right? So I think we can do that. And at the moment, that's actually what we're going to try and do. I've been working with ministers to try and introduce this operating model into the state sector. Now, that's not without its resistance. Yeah, we'll see. Well, call me back in a couple of years and we'll tell you how it goes. But people don't like it very much, simply because they're being disintermediated. It's a bit like inviting Uber into Wellington, Capital Combined inviting Uber into Wellington saying, yeah, come on in, you know.